afternoon. It's like 2 o'clock. This is like a record for me. Hi, I don't know where the cameras are, but hi to the people who are watching at home. Hi to the people in the room as well. Lovely to have you here with us. So we're here to talk about AI and a kind of entry point into that and a discussion as well. And nothing says regeneration, reshaping and reforming like AI. So as Steve and Rich talked about earlier, AI is starting to make its way into the planning profession, but it might just be at a more embryonic stage just now, so we're going to do some digging on that later. As Steve and Rich talked about as well, this is the session that you told us you wanted. It's all about the practical application of AI and advice. What this isn't is a chat about AI in terms of the headlines that you will have seen. So we're not talking about Terminators. We're not talking about the robots are coming for your jobs. Sometimes in these discussions you'll always need a human for advice, and we kind of take that as read as part of this session. I definitely am not here for those stock pictures of the robot and the human shaking hands when there's an AI story. I'm not on board with that at all. But what we are going to talk about is we're going to hear from a couple of great planners. We've got Johnny Stubbs at Lift Financial, and we've got Alistair Walker from HAW about the extent to which they're deploying AI in their business and how they're using it to drive efficiencies. But first, we're going to hear from Ewan Mitchell from Aviva, and he's going to give us a little bit of a kind of entry point and explainer as to why, as to what we're really talking about when we're talking about AI. So it's a pretty technical subject, but I'll try and keep it on a level as much as I can. So Ewan is really steeped in this stuff. He's got a background in data science, and he's going to start by giving us an explainer around what the various terms mean when we're talking about AI and all the terminology around it. So first of all, please welcome Johnny, Alistair, and Ewan to the stage. So Ewan, if you could kick us off then. Big question. What do we actually mean when we talk about AI?
That's a very good question. So a lot of people mean a lot of different things. There's many different reasons for that. Some of that is because the meaning has actually changed over time. So I'm going to give you a couple of different definitions of AI as we go through. But another is a lot of people will tell you things are AI when they aren't actually AI. So there's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there at the moment. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start with, I'm going to go through an onion. So I'm going to start with AI. AI is the biggest concept. Within that, you've probably heard of machine learning as well. Within machine learning is deep learning. And then more recently, you'll have heard a lot about maybe generative AI, which is things like ChatGPT, and then foundational models or large language models. And all of those things are related. So the first definition of AI I want to give, and this is the traditional one. So AI has been around since about the 1950s. That's when the Turing test was invented. It's when the MIT AI lab started working. And that definition is basically whenever a computer makes a decision. So that's a really simple definition of AI. And that kind of AI, which we might call now rules-based AI, went on until about the turn of the century. And all of the AI that was being built until about the turn of the century was that kind of thing. So the hypothesis of that, probably said that word wrong, was Deep Blue. So if you remember 1997, Deep Blue was a computer program built by IBM which beat Garry Kasparov at chess. So Deep Blue had been built for about 10 years. They started building it in 1987. And it took 10 years using that way of creating AI to make something which could beat a human at chess. But we're going to see how that's changed quite dramatically now. The big change was what we now call machine learning. And so machine learning is literally what it sounds like. So it's teaching machines how to learn. So all of the AI up till about year 2000 or so, I'm not sure what exactly the change point was, we had to build the rules for. But machine learning is basically where you get a machine to learn stuff. So I've not done this yet, but I'm going to ask people to put hands up. Has anyone ever done a regression in Excel? Put your hand up if you've ever done a regression in Excel. So I don't know, I can't count how many that, it looks about a third of you, I'm sure it's more than that. That's basically machine learning. So that's a very simple example of machine learning. You put some data in there, and the computer behind it works out what the correlation is, and then you can extrapolate that. And very simply, at a very simple level, that's what all machine learning is. You put some data in there and extrapolates it. most machine learning models that we use now are tree-based. So they've got slightly exotic names like random forest or XGBoost or boosted trees and things like this, but they're decision trees, so they're quite easy to understand actually. But the key thing is that it's a really simple thing, and it scales because it's simple, and we allow the computer to learn it. And most of the, what you might call AI, that you'll encounter is now based on those tree-based algorithms. So it used to be, I think Netflix has got something else now, but if you went on Netflix, or if you went on Spotify, or if you go on a website, what you get served up there is a personalization engine, and sitting behind it are these tree-based models. The next layer of the onion is neural nets or deep learning. So neural nets have been around since about the 80s, but they were a backwater. So when people like Geoffrey Hinton, who's now considered the godfather of AI, was working with neural nets in the 80s, it was very much a backwater. I actually came across a neural net in the 90s, and it had 4 neurons in it. And the way a neural network works, again, it's exactly what it says on the tin. So it's modeled on the way our brains work. And the way our brains work is you have neuron connections between different ideas, and the more we see those two ideas connected, the more weight, to use the computer terminology, the more weight is put between that connection. So again, it's a really simple idea, but it's massively scalable. But nothing happened really very much in that until the 2000s, and probably about 15 years ago, when, because of Moore's law, every 2 years the computing power doubles, suddenly we had really powerful computers. And the other thing that happened about that time was the internet. And the internet provides you with lots and lots of data to train these things on. So by the time of about 2016, we had models like BERT, which is a language model, come back to language models in a minute, had 100 million different parameters in it. So it's basically 100 million different neurons. And that's what allows the complexity, or what you might call highly non-linear kind of predictions that it can do. I said I'd come back to Deep Blue. In 2016 again, you may have heard of AlphaGo. So this is a company called DeepMind, actually, which is based just across the road from here. They built a model using deep learning, which beat the world's best Go player. Now, Go is more complicated than chess, so I had to look this up. Apparently, there's 10 to the 40 different possible moves in chess, but there's 10 to the 240, so that's one with 240 zeros after it, possible moves in Go. So Go is way more complicated than chess. And to give you an idea of quite how big that is, the number of atoms in the universe is 10 to the power of 80. So that's like inside every atom in the universe, if there was another universe, and inside that universe there was another universe, and you counted all of those. That's the complexity here. Now the comparison there, and this is the exponential growth again, was it took them 2 years to build AlphaGo, because essentially they were allowing it to learn itself. So that's the real power that we have behind all of these models now. Then the next thing is Gen AI, so that's the next layer in our onion. All of the models that I've described so far, you could call predictive models. So what you're doing is you're putting in, you can think of it as a funnel. You're putting in at the top a load of data, and then you're funneling it down to one thing. So if you think of images, what you might do is you put in an image of a cat. At the bottom, the model says, this is a cat. You put in an image of a dog, at the bottom it says, this is not a cat. Essentially, what Gen AI is doing is it's turning that upside down, and actually literally behind the scenes, that's what things like ChatGPT are doing. So we can say, again, in the image space, show me a cat, and it will randomly produce a cat. Show me a dog, and it will randomly produce a dog. So generative AI, which is what the big explosion you've heard in AI over the last year has been, is very different to predictive AI. And that means that the use cases, which we'll probably get onto talking about in a minute, are very different. I could go through all different types of Gen AI, but I don't think I will.
Okay, good. Maybe I'll just stay with you for like a minute or so, Ewan. So when we had a little pre-chat, as we do with these things before, there were a couple of jargony things that I thought that sounded really interesting, and one of them was about hallucination. So why don't you tell me about what that is and why that happens?
So we talked about hallucination, we talked about prompt injection as well.
Yeah, that's
maybe
right,
go through those two. So what hallucinations are is, fundamentally all of these models are statistical models. So when you ask, I don't know, ChatGPT to tell you about something, under the hood what's going on is it's looking at the data that it was trained on and then giving something like that. So an example might be, if you ask ChatGPT why are Croatia such a good football team for quite a small country, it'll give you a really informed answer about that. You could ask the same question about Bhutan, and Bhutan actually aren't that great at football. In fact, I think they're either bottom or second bottom in the league, in the FIFA rankings. And it'll give you the same answer. And that's because ChatGPT knows that that's the right kind of answer. It can't find the answer, but it's giving you an answer that sounds right. And that's one of the things you've got to really watch out for with some of these models.
The AI is essentially making it up, but based on the data it has.
Because it will always give you some answer. So something's always going to pop out at the end. And it will just give you what's the most plausible answer. It's not actually doing thinking. We think that these models are thinking. It's just using statistics to give you the nearest neighbour, basically, is what it's looking at. And the other one was prompt injection. There's a really interesting example. If you Google the DPD chatbot, so DPD, the delivery, I'm assuming there's nobody from DPD in the audience here.
I wouldn't have thought so.
But there's a DPD chatbot, so most of these chatbots, what's going on is you've got these language models like ChatGPT underneath it, and then there's a layer on top of it, which is formatting the answers the questions that it's asking to the model, and then formatting what comes out. But you can jailbreak that, and that's what prompt injection is. So you can ask it to, say you're not this, but you can ask it to pretend that you're a Nazi if you want, and it'll start giving you answers back as if it's Hitler or something like that sometimes. But the DPD example was this guy managed to prompt inject the DPD chatbot, and the DPD chatbot started talking about how rubbish DPD was. So we have to put guardrails around these models. There's massive opportunity here, but we have to walk into it with our eyes open.
Okay, that's a brilliant scene setting. Thank you very much for that. And we'll kind of come back to you as we go through the conversation. Bringing it now into kind of the financial planning world and applying some of that stuff that Ewan was talking about. So, Johnny, I think you're someone who's gone from, you had a personal interest in AI, you kind of brought it into the business, and now you are kind of in the full sense of the word deploying AI in your business. So perhaps you can tell me a little bit about what happened there and what you're doing as a business.
Yeah, so I think I first started playing around with generative AI with ChatGPT back in start of 2023. And it was just for fun mainly because it was, a bit of a gimmick. I'm a bit of an IT geek anyway. And very quickly I started to realise there's something in this, what are business use cases. So I was just playing around. We hadn't really done anything in the business. And then I went to a mini conference run by a company called Implement AI. It was actually Piers Linney, the Dragon Den.
Oh, yeah.
It's his company.
Yeah.
And a guy called Alex Shuttler. And that was that blew my mind, and that gave me so many ideas off the back of that where generative AI and LLM technology could do. And I picked up the name of a company there called Cypher, or CIFA, since changed the name to Advisory AI. And basically what they were doing, it's an XIFA, SJP, I know that's sometimes a nasty word, but, and he's got an MIT friend who's machine learning, kind of same background as you, and they wanted to create something that basically automates the advice process. And they started a little focusing on meeting notes. So this is recording meeting notes that an advisor has with a client. And rather than, the advisor spending an hour or two after writing up those meeting notes to, make sure there's soft facts there and a record of the conversation, they thought, well, we'll use this, what we know, to auto-generate that. So that's what we've been working with them on since sort of June, July last year. And now we've rolled that out. So it's probably easier to explain what it does. So a lot of our meetings now are on Teams. We still do face-to-face ones. So a little bot joins the Teams meeting, which you might have seen. The audio's recorded. After the meeting, when it's ended, that gets sort of uploaded to the AI system. It transcribes it, and that's a key bit of the technology, transcribing it well. It's much better than Teams transcription. And then it works its magic, and to me, it is magic. Ewan probably understands it. And we've worked with the developers, and it formats, or it spits out all the information we want in our sort of template meeting note that we were using before that we were manually entering. And that's gone from something that used to take the advisor or a paraplanner sort of an hour to 2 hours, depending on what type of meeting, to it's generated 10 minutes, within 10 minutes after the meeting, and it's something me and you were discussing earlier, there's always going to be some human input in this, but we've had the target of working with, if it can do 80% of what we were doing previously, and we got a top and tail 20%, that's a massive time saving. And we're seeing that now. We've rolled that out to 15 advisors, and we're just starting to get everyone up to speed with it.
Okay, great. So you're pretty much getting to a place where you're using AI to automate the advice process as much as possible. And when you first kind of took it to management and said, I think we should start rolling out AI as part of our advice business, what did they say to you?
Well, it's always a worry. We kind of, I sit on the senior leadership team, and since I've been at the company, they've always been quite forward-thinking with IT. They've always been willing to invest, which isn't my experience of all IFAs. So actually, when we took it to them, and we were excited about it, and we put a pitch together, it went down really well. They said, yep, let's get on it. And that's allowed us to really move on this quickly. And, we're a bigger company, so we can maybe put a bit more cash behind it.
Yeah.
But it's really allowed us to kind of crack on.
Okay, great. I might come back to that. But Alistair, you've been kind of sitting there, waiting there patiently. So where do you kind of come into this discussion with AI, particularly in its role in advice?
Yeah, so I think when we were speaking in advance, I said I'd be the interested but sceptical party, because I find there's a big gap between people who think this is absolutely the thing everybody should be doing everything in. It's going to replace everyone. It's just going to be computers talking to computers. Humans will be out of the way completely. And then there's people who are like, never, not in a million years. I'm going to be writing by quill until I retire. And there's this whole massive gap in the middle. Of sort of sensible, pragmatic discussion about practical use of AI. So I think used tactically and pragmatically to enhance the processes that are already in place, that's certainly where we've started to get some real traction quite early on. So I'm earlier. I think I'm earlier in. We were talking earlier about this. I'm earlier in the process. But by having taken a little bit of a backseat, I feel quite lucky because I've let ChatGPT's board fall apart and then be built back up, and that's all happened. And Microsoft are busy trying to monetize it for themselves, and that means I've switched Copilot 365 on, which is one of the 17 different brands of Copilot. If you've looked at Microsoft's branding strategy, very strange. And we were talking about meeting notes, and we use Zoom's built-in AI for meeting notes, and it's great when it works. It's like magic when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's hilarious. And
I've had a lot of Batmans in my transcriptions, I think.
Yeah, well, that's it, and it does summarising. And I had one quite in-depth meeting with a client, financial planning discussion, lots of talk about the financial plan, the long term, and the 3-sentence pithy summary ran to 2.5 pages of email. Like the AI had just got lost in the data. But what Copilot is starting to let us do really early days on this is to really train the very general large language model on our information. So just as an example, and this is a trite example really, I had to write a CPD log for something I attended last week this morning. So I sat in the coffee shop and I was like, can Copilot do this for me? So I said, right, read this email, Copilot, and write me a brief about the CPD event. It did it. It was quite good. I said, okay, now incorporate the PDF CPD certificate into that because it's got more data. And what came out was beautiful. If that CPD ever gets audited, I'll be so happy. So that's like a really stupid example of something that, I mean, everyone hates doing, right? Who wants to write a reflective statement for CPD? That can be automated and a really better outcome than a human's ever going to write.
And so, Johnny, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you've kind of been going through this process where you're bringing AI into your business for what, past year and a half?
Past 6 months,
okay.
Practically. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So kind of from that moment when you sort of took it to the board and they said, okay, let's run with it, to you kind of now being at a position where you're automating meeting notes, automating a suitability report, I think, as well. What are the kind of lessons that you might have for the people who are watching this around kind of, the things that have gone well or perhaps less well?
Yeah, I think, Alistair's right. It can get it wrong, and it's always have that human input at this stage. Look, I don't know what in 5 years hence, but always have that human input. You need that as a safety net. especially in what we do and the implications of getting it wrong. But as well, don't be scared of trying it, because it is really powerful. That little example there with the CPD, if you extrapolate that to meeting notes, and the latest project working on is suitability reports, literally we've launched that this week, getting the first few of them. Yeah, that's mind-blowing what it's doing, and that's what it is. Once it clicks for you, once you've used this and you see the benefits, look, it needs managing and shaping, and a lot of work needs to go into that, but it's, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that then. So I say automated suitability reports like that's an easy thing. That's not an easy thing. So tell me, what is the AI doing as part of that process?
So effectively, if you think of the inputs into it, it's got the audio, the original audio from the meeting. So Alistair's talked to his clients, who's recorded all that. It's already produced a summary meeting note. The advisor's then gone in and topped and tailed that meeting note because there were some things not quite right, it hallucinated a bit, whatever. And that's getting better all the time, getting more and more accurate. So it's got the updated meeting note, the original audio. We upload sort of a big Voyant report with all the sort of hard data about the client's financial situation, upload a PDF copy of the fact find, and then plug it in. I think it takes about 20 minutes, and it comes back and it populates one of our annual review suitability letters. So
it's filling out that template.
It's filling out that template, but it's not just filling out the name, the address, all the things that technology has been doing quite badly for the last 5-10 years. It's getting the nuance and the context of the conversation that Alistair's had with his client, and it's writing objectives which are better than, well, definitely better than some of our advisors, and they'll hold their hand up and say that. It's writing better objectives than sometimes the humans can. Yes, it misses something, but we're aiming for that, 70-80% getting it right, because that's a massive time saving. Yeah. We've got 1,500 clients. If we can save even a couple of hours on every report, that's game changing. And
what about things like outliers? So perhaps if something hasn't been covered in a conversation, will it flag that?
Yeah, we kind of built in, I think you mentioned like safety net, so we got the developers, when something isn't covered, so we had like areas in the meeting note that would be covered, like pensions, IHT, protection. So protection is a good one, because not all advisors always cover that, because it's something that's discussed every year and it's just not a need. And it'll flag up that that's not been discussed. So that's like a backstop, and it just flags it up in bold, so the advisor can go in and top and tail it.
That will be made clear in the report, you didn't cover X.
Yeah, this wasn't discussed, or, yeah.
Okay, so it's almost providing the prompts for the next follow-up, yeah.
So for the paraplanner to go in and, this is what the role of a paraplanner, our firm, is going to change massively over this year, I think.
Do you think so?
Yeah, massive change there. It's going to become a more fun role. They're not going to have to do that mundane bit of filling in a suitability report, all the boring bits. We'll be able to redeploy that resource to do more working with the planner, sitting on meetings, doing calculations, more value add for the client.
And Alistair, are there any other use cases where you use it, or any other kind of, I guess, maybe niggles or concerns you have around the limitations of bringing a technology like this into the process?
So many concerns. I'm trying to think what the first professional indemnity claim about a piece of advice that went wrong that was written by the AI.
That might be us.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about it in a year or two. Or the first regulatory intervention where the regulator says, oh, well, these people went and did this thing, and you gave the advice, and the advisor says, well, yes, it was me, but... And it's like, what are we going to do? We're going to go to Microsoft and ask them for some indemnity. This is the skeptical side coming in here. I feel that I find the concept. I really like the idea of having the suitability reports being sort of helped being written. That sounds really useful. And again, Copilot, I think, is the way we're going to look at this. But I worry about people being given this sort of toolbox and going, oh, great, that means I don't have to do my job anymore, And it's that danger that always comes with disruptive technology. It's like the self-driving car thing, and who's going to sit behind the wheel of a car that they know might kill them in an accident situation to save somebody else? And it's like the what happens if questions.
that we just don't know the answers to yet.
Yeah, I think you've got to have that human input. That's the one thing we're absolutely certain of. There is never, never say never, but at this stage and for the foreseeable, there's always going to have to be that, paraplanner and advisor input on the meeting note, on the suitability report. Ultimately, we're telling our advisors, you're taking responsibility for that advice just like you were before. You've now got, in theory, a bit more time to do it a bit better,
Right, thank you for that. So we've kind of set the scene here. I'm going to try and do a poll if I can. So Steve and Rich at the top of the day, they talked about our State of the Advice Nation report, out now, and what we were finding on AI. And some people are saying they're about to implement AI or they've already implemented it, but we're like, what does that actually mean? So we're trying to try and get a sense of that, I guess, with this poll. So where do you see yourself on the AI progress scale? We've played around with the free version of ChatGPT. We've started to have already integrated AI in our business. You guys have got it down here on the screen to save your necks. Somewhere in between, or not interested in AI and advice, never going to be. So,
Natalie,
yes.
I feel like we need to do the BBC thing where we say other large language models are available.
Okay,
there's Bard
sorry.
and there's Grok. And
ChatGPT and others. So I think it's mostly people playing with free tools. Yeah. And 5% have said they're not interested, so sorry for this session. But yeah, so I think there are people who are starting to integrate it into their business, but mainly it's the free versions of software that people are using here. And I think, Johnny, your kind of view on that is that actually to get the most out of it, you perhaps maybe need to go beyond the stuff that's available freely.
Yeah, I think for what we're doing, it's that automation. Yeah, you're not going to get that off the shelf. I think, as Al says, Microsoft Copilot, that's just been released to smaller companies. It was, just for enterprise level. That's potentially a game changer. We're looking at that. We don't know what that's going to do. That might do some of, what these smaller companies like we're working with do, but who knows? We're keeping our options open.
Okay, perfect. Right, so I can see that people have kind of been fired up into asking questions. So I'm going to take a few of them. I think this is quite an interesting one. And maybe you, and feel free to chip in at any point. Do you declare a report has been generated by an AI service or even partially written by AI?
No, I don't think there's any need to because of the human input.
Okay. Next question. Have you written a company AI policy, Johnny? And if so, what would you say were the vital points to include so there's no misuse of AI systems?
Yeah, we have. This is something we've worked on from the start. We've briefed all staff. We've locked down what they can use from an IT point of view because, we don't want any client data escaping or being put into sort of tools we don't trust. So we do full due diligence on anyone we work with. They can't use ChatGPT because the tools we are using are kind of, our data is in a protected sphere within Amazon AWS. That's what the IT guys tell me, but it means it's our data. Just the same as a CRM is like IntelliFlow, so it's very similar to that.
Mm-hmm. So I would say it's really important to have something like that. So even if you aren't implementing it internally, almost particularly if you aren't implementing it internally, there's probably people within your company who are going to go and use things like ChatGPT. And there's a few different risks there. So one is that, actually mostly associated with the fact that you're sending your data out across the internet. So that could be intercepted by somebody else. But also all the data that you send to, there are other models available as well, sent to these models are used in training. So it's storing your data and it may come up in somebody else's searches. Well,
it's one of our due diligence questions is, similar to what Microsoft have done with Copilot is, our data isn't going to be used to train, other clients' data, so it's segregated at their client levels. And that's important.
Okay, great. I'll take one or two more questions, and perhaps I'll put this one to you, Ewan. How do advisors square away the risk of putting real data into open source tools like ChatGPT and Bard?
How do you swear it away?
How do you square away?
How do you square it away? So, I think the answer is probably to do more along the lines of what Johnny's doing. Mm-hmm. So Microsoft have Azure versions of these tools. They also have delimited data, which you can use for yourself. So if you're worried about your data, don't use the open source tools. I think that's basically the answer.
Okay. So be sure of your data first before you start playing with this stuff.
Your data, data is the key thing here, really. People talk about models, but data is the key thing. What makes those models powerful is the data. And in the future, I think we're going to be much more concerned with protecting our own data because we'll see the value of it much more than we do at the moment. So look after your data.
Okay. And perhaps this one for Alistair and Johnny. To what degree is AI going to replace paraplanners and administrators?
So it's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because there's an awkwardness to saying we're going to make the business 80% more productive when it comes to writing reports, for example. Because you go, so does that mean you need 80% fewer people to deliver the same thing? So the reality is that any massive disruptive technology is going to result in a change in the way people work. Now, the classic one, you look at like supermarket checkouts. So I don't think the number of employees at supermarkets has changed very much. There was lots of talk about, there'll never be anyone in the supermarket because everyone will be self-checking out. The problem is you now need someone to look after the self-checkout machines. So the job's changed. And I suspect that in 3 or 5 years, the job of paraplanning will no longer be sitting there, and this isn't all paraplanners, and the job of paraplanning describes lots of different things. But if part of it is sitting and writing reports, grabbing templates, doing those things, then yeah, it gets a bit more interesting because you're not having to do that bit anymore. You're just going to have it presented, and then you're going to be making it really good.
Great. I've got a timer flashing at me, so I'm just going to ask one question, perhaps to Johnny and to you briefly. If you could kind of just perhaps summarise the difference that AI is making, and if you've got advice for people getting the most out of it, I guess.
It's game changing for our firm, for the advice process. The impact we see with just these, meeting notes and suitability reports. We've got other business use cases we're looking at. They were just a low hanging fruit. Yeah, game changing. In a positive way for a company like us that is growing. It's massive, and yeah, I think advice to anyone: just get stuck in, be brave. Obviously, do your due diligence. Client data security is massively important. But yeah.
Perfect. Ewan, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's related to the question about replacing jobs as well. I don't think anyone's going to be able to tell you what's going to happen in the next couple of years or how fast it's going to happen. I agree with what Alistair was saying about it's going to change the nature of jobs. So whilst we can't predict exactly what's going to happen, we're right at the top of the hype cycle, right? So people are going to waste a lot of money, all of that kind of stuff. But I think it's important to start educating yourself about it. It's important to try a couple of things, see how you might be able to use it, and then only actually invest properly when you've understood it a bit more. So actually, it's a good place to end. I think this is a good session to come to because I think that's the sort of thing that people should be doing. This is just a start of that.
Great. Okay, perfect. We have run out of time. Please thank our panel, Johnny, Alistair, and Ewan.